Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Insurance Experts. My name is Mark Lichtman. I'm an actuary and a long-term care insurance expert. And it's my pleasure to have on the line Gail Steingold. She's a long-term care specialist, and she's also my good friend. And thanks so much for being on the show today, Gail.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate this time with you.
So I know we're going to be doing a webinar together to educate members of the trust, oftentimes psychologists, about long-term care planning and long-term care insurance. Tell me a little bit first about how you got connected with the trust and your relationship with them.
Well, it's unbelievable that it's been 20 years. And when I met people at the trust that were very interested in starting a program for the psychologists who a good portion were aging, and certainly many young people coming in. And so there was a concern, and this is really the mission of the trust, for financial and security. And so long-term care really was something on their agenda. So we started it then back in 1999, 2000, the due diligence, and rolled out a program, I think probably mid-year of 2000. Started out with one company, and then we moved in 2005 to our byline. Now you have more choices, and we've given choices as the market has changed and different solutions have come into the marketplace for long-term care planning.
Very cool. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about the solutions on this video and a lot more on the webinar. But first of all, how did you get into long-term care insurance? What's your story and kind of what resonated with you about it?
Well, yeah, I get that question. How did I start out as a speech pathologist, and now I was, quote, selling long-term care insurance? And it's actually, there is a thread. I was a speech pathologist for 14 years at a hospital-based 300-bed long-term care facility in downtown Chicago. So we had every possible socioeconomic population at that time. And so I was running a speech and hearing program and then moved into marketing the last 5 years. And so my frustration was really twofold. One, with my own patient load of not being able to really complete the work that I felt that patient needed because of the limitations by Medicare, looking for what I thought sometimes some unrealistic progress and that we ask of somebody who's been ill, and also the frustration of really people very worried and stressed, and family members at that time, not knowing how they were going to be able to afford their care. So I think those were two very big issues for me, clinically, professionally, and just really emotionally at that time.
Cool. And that, probably being a speech pathologist, gives you a lot of insight into the mindset of the psychologists that you work with. What would you say are the unique, tenets of the psychologist that's looking at long-term care planning, if you had to describe it?
Well, I'd have to say I was vetted for a long time by the trust and their board of trustees, and I think the synergy between us being clinicians, asking a lot of questions, being somewhat analytical, and needing to take the time to feel comfortable with our decisions. And I think that's very much a profile, not to overgeneralize, of psychologists. So I think we connect very well, and the people that I have working with me also have that type of profile. And just to be able to be intelligent, and in the sense of knowing what we're doing, and when we don't know, making sure we find out.
Yeah, and I know you're very analytical as well. What would you say is the most common misconception that you're able to demystify for the psychologists that you talk to about long-term?
Well, I think the big thing is that we deal with facts, and we deal with the fact that how much care is going to cost in an area where that psychologist and his or her family lives, and what they think they might be doing in the future. So we really try to tailor a plan that, knowing also their health history and their financial profile that they are able to share, they find out that they can get some very meaningful coverage for, say, if they're in their mid to late 50s, maybe as not as much as $200 or $300 a month. They also didn't know that they could actually, if they had private practice, which is very common, even with tenure at a university, say, or or working in a hospital, that they could maybe make a deduction if they chose, because these plans are tax qualified. And I think that's been a big relief to hear that they're not paying totally after taxes possibly for their coverage.
Yeah, I think that people will probably be surprised to hear that, $200 $300 a month for the cost of the insurance, plus being able to deduct it through their businesses. That's quite a value proposition for them. What would you say is the typical experience that you're seeing from the psychologists personally about why they're coming to you interested in talking about planning today? Are you finding that they're aware of it, or do they have personal experiences, or what's the primary motivation for them to come to you?
Well, I think there's so much more. Back in when we started the program in 2000, I think there was a lot of misconception, as you had mentioned earlier, about
Mhm.
the quality of these plans and how they could really help. And I think that, coupled with people somewhat in denial, which I still see that they won't need it. It's hard to identify with that. But I think the psychologists are seeing more and more of their own caseloads dealing with these issues of aging or disability, and how that's affecting the family members, the consequences to family members and to their finances. So I think that that's really where the growth has come. And I think there's just much more public information about long-term care, and discussions in the media from financial advisors and economists about this. So we know that we hear every day that people are going to be needing more and more cares, particularly at this time. And people do want to have choices as to where they receive that care. They really want to have that as part of their decision in planning.
Very cool. Well, I know we're going to talk a lot more about this on the webinar. We'll talk about the different plans and the options, and obviously about the planning process. I really appreciate your expertise and for joining us here today on the show, Gail.
Thank you, Mark.